जय गजानन। गणेशाय नमस्तुभ्यं, हेरम्बाय एकदन्तिने, स्वानन्दवासिने तुभ्यं ब्रह्मणस्पतये नमः. Hello friends, we shall continue with our discussion on sacred conversations between Shiva and Parvati, where Shiva was describing about a yogi. In the earlier class, we saw how the yogi regulates the breath, the flow of breath, which automatically, along with the consciousness, that gets split or modified into 5 different vayus, that is prana, udana, vyana, samana, and apana. So these different vayus perform the different functions in the body. Apart from that, we also saw that there were 5 other external outward going vayus. There were 5 other outward going vayus, which were like Naga, Karma, Krakara, Devadatta, Dhananjaya, and how these regulate the functioning of the body. And then we also saw how in the proximity of the prana, how to regulate this energy the different these energy. The moment we say energy, they are almost like certain invisible powers in our body. So how do you regulate and navigate them so that we can optimize the functioning or the conditioning of the body? So this has to be learned under a guru, within the proximity of a guru, so that he can see you, observe you, and able to prevent any mishaps taking place, because these being the subtle energies in the body needs to be properly guided. Otherwise, getting into a wrong organ inside the body will become irrevocable, or you can say irreparable, or very difficult to repair if something goes wrong, because these energies are permanent. You carry it over lifetimes. So we need to regulate it properly. And so we need to do it only under the guidance of a guru. So that's why the basic pranayam you can do any by even reading a book, but or observing or watching a video. But then the subtler, the deeper you go into application of yoga into spirituality, when you navigate in that direction towards communion or union with the divine, we need to, because the forces become more and more subtle, it's almost invisible to say, so to say. So we need to proper guidance and also the grace of the divine helps us in that effort. So we saw how the importance of the kumbhak, holding of the breath, where the holding of the breath is where everything happens. Everything happens in the sense the learning happens, the awareness, the muscle of awareness develops. So when you do that, the kumbhaks also, it's holding the breath. You cannot hold the breath for too long. Your lungs have limited capacity. There are limited number of air sacs in the lungs, in the tissues in the lungs, and so there's only this much amount of air that you can hold, and how long you can hold it. So all these need to be regulated, and that too, it is done very subtly and very slowly. It's done over a long period of time. You just cannot crash into that kind of activity. So, and we also saw how a consistency and frequency of practice of this kumbhaks is what helps. That is, we do a yogish practice, 20 kumbhaks, that holding of breath 4 times a day. dawn, midday, dusk, and midnight. So, in this way, a regular practice and with a limited number, you can begin with even two kumbhaks. There's no restrictions of how you slowly build up that lung capacity, and then when you are able to reach that stage, you can easily slide into from a meditation into a samadhi like state, that is in the communion with the divine energies. So that's why he had told us about the Arambha Avastha, that is the beginning stage, the alignment of the self with the higher self, then Parichaya, that is acquaintance, that is you embody, you understand with the knowledge, with the knowingness, not just information. And then you reach the final stage of consummation with that supreme or the higher self. So this is what doing pranayam makes a yogi very physically fit. He has a strong appetite, good digestion, is cheerful, has a handsome figure, great courage, is enthusiastic and strong. These qualities look very exciting, but there is a rigorous process before you can attain it. So that's what Shiva explains in the next paragraph, in the next sloka. So, in that conversation between Shiva and Parvati, he says the yogi should be careful of certain obstacles and avoid it at all costs. He should give up acids, astringents, pungent substances, salt, mustard, bitter things. So this is as far as what you intake in terms of food, not acidic food. Too much of acidic food creates obstructions in the stomach, in the sense that when there is excess of acid, it comes upwards. It's not thrown downwards. It doesn't go into the digestion at all. It comes above into the lungs, and it causes the heartburn. So that we have all had has seen this acidic experience. We have had this acidic, particularly when you don't take food for a long time. If you prolong your lunch time, if you're in the office, you get to work, and then you eat at 3 o'clock, then the acid builds up. Not only the acid that of the food that you have taken, but the gastric juice and the bile and which the stomach secretes, and normally it gets accumulated, and that since there's no food for it to go to for which it to act upon, and so there's nothing to act upon, so it cannot go downwards, it will come upwards, because it's only the gross food, the heaviness of the food, that it takes it downwards into the small intestine, large intestine, for absorption, assimilation, and all of that. So otherwise, the panavayu, that is the exhalation, it will come upwards, and then when that comes with that acid, it causes burn just in the sternum, near the sternum. You have that burning sensation, and then you get acidity, and then you have problems of a lot of discomfort happens. And then you find solutions for that. Of course, we have medical prescriptions, but then those are solutions, not prevention. So how do you prevent? By eating on time, and not to eat more of acidic, because or astringents or pungent, very tika, means that is you eat a lot of chilies, chili powders, or pungent things, that is in the West you call it spicy, but here even just chilies, if you take red chili that's consumed a lot, then that can have a harmful effect. It causes damage to the organs, and there are people who have suffered a lot because of that. Green chilies are good, but then you can't eat more than, means unless you are your tissues are strong enough to absorb it. Otherwise, I couldn't have a little bit of a bite. One bite, I couldn't. It just the hip, I immediately, the last trip to Bombay, while coming back, I said, okay, we'll have vada pav, because the driver was telling, that nimbu juice has a lot of chemicals in it, and it's better to have a fresh limbu juice rather than a bottled one. So you better have something even vada pav is better than that. So I said, okay, we'll have vada pav. And then I just bit one bit of that end of that chili, and the hiccup came. The hiccup is that external vayu, that is outward going vayu, which immediately got activated, and the hiccup comes. So then you drink water. So how do you understand your body? It's not for everybody. You can't, for a yogis cannot even have that. And at the most, if you want to have pungent, in as for a yogi, the pepper, black pepper, or powder, or even the boiled one, put it in boiled water, and you can have that pepper, because that is a good prana in that, from the pungence point of view. So then you can have salt. You are not supposed to have salt. Not supposed to have means not excess of it, because when you have excess of it, it over activates the circulatory vayu. So that's why the BP increases. Bitter things, mustard is a heat, it's giving heat, a lot of heat. This and it also heats it gives a burning sense, particularly the mustard. It gives a certain burning sensation in the digestive tracts when you take the extracted oil and from that. So that's so see how Shiva is guiding, even in the small matters that actually can have an influence in the spiritual practice. Then he says there should be much walking, early bathing, that is even before sunrise. Things roasted in oil should be avoided. Do not, there should be no, means you should not engage in theft, killing of animals, enmity towards any person. Pride should be avoided. There should be no duplicity, that is, you can't be double-edged sword kind of a thing, that you can't say one thing and do another thing, or think one thing and do another thing. Enmity towards any person. Crookedness, fasting you should practice. Untruth, avoid falsehood. Thoughts, you should entertain thoughts only, don't entertain thoughts other than of moksha, that is liberating thoughts, or freedom giving thoughts, or freedom inducing thoughts. Positivity, avoid cruelty towards animals. Even companionship of women is to be avoided, or in the sense that no indulgence. What's meant here is no indulgence into uncharted territory. Then worship or sitting near fire. When you engage in the worship or sitting near fire for prolonged period of times, it should be regulated. Means only during the time of when you're doing the offering. After that, it is means it's made to settle down. That fire is not kept burning, except in the case of Siddha yogis, where they always have a dhuni, that is holy ashes, which is burning in a corner, from where, because and due to the vibrations of the body, that gets absorbed into that heat, means that that heat is gets burnt away, and then that gets accumulated as ashes, and those ashes have medicinal properties. So that's why in Siddha yogis, those who, so in this they do have a permanent burning fireplace. Then you have much talking should be avoided, without regard to much talking without regard to pleasantness or unpleasantness of speech. So you should have moderate speaking and be aware of what you're talking. See that your words are mild or modulated. We have a tendency these days to use very sharp words or very harsh words. In fact, the words sting more than anything else. Even a physical harm would not would be mild, you can say. At least that is recoverable. But the sting of the words goes right into the antakaran. Antakaran is the subtlemost part of a person's body. So the words are very sharp. So we need to use very mild, moderated words. Don't use very heavy words like the word shit is being used so for anything and everything. I mean, just see the reaction you get when you use it and what all emotions come out. Means it's almost emotions of throwing out, right? So we need to be moderate in the or and sensitive in the kind of words that we use in our expression, so that it gives the appropriate meaning, it conveys what needs to be conveyed, and it gives a sense of, even in the communication there should be a compassionate communication, so that half the work is done in that communication itself. Extra effort need not be done. So we need to be these are very deep how you develop this. It is an expertise how you develop, just like a voice modulation. When you go for a voice modulation class, how you develop the different modulation, voice gets modulated according to the script, according to what you want to convey, what emotion that has to come out when you speak. So you can't have a dull and drab kind of voice modulation for expressing of a desire or for healing or something like that. It should be a very so these voice modulation classes teach much better than me. So so what I mean to say is everything is an expertise. So when you become sensitive to that area, you will convey better and your choice of words will improve. And besides, another thing, when you consider the choice of words, each area of function has its own vocabulary. Many times, the vocabulary used for a certain function, if it is applied in another area of activity, it can cause harm, it can cause hurt, it can cause misunderstanding, and unnecessary effects. Like, for example, certain words which we use for engineering, in the engineering field, which is applicable to mechanical things, like for example, lubricants. You use lubricants for smoothening the threads of the machine or something of the parts of the machine. Now, if that is applied to your knees, I mean, this particular medicine is for lubricating the joints of your knees. Imagine the kind of impact it has. It makes you feel that as though your body is a machine. Means it has no sensitivity, it has no emotions, it has no, means it is disconnected and just made into a robotic kind of a structure. So it gives you that feeling. I remember that one lady told me, means that you need to drink tea, like a tea like when you're working in a busy in very like in an office, when you're working, when you're continuously doing the job, you need to keep at least sipping tea or drinking some in between once. And what she said was, you need to put petrol now and then. Now, she meant the use of petrol, like how in a vehicle you put the petrol so to keep the engine running. So she wanted to convey that you need to keep feeding your body from time to time so to keep it running. But then when you compare that vocabulary with what is applicable to a body, it is jarring. And then what happens, very the ignorant, the thoroughly dull people will actually start putting that kind of substance inside the body. Means if they are so dull that they will no, somebody told me, and they were intelligent people, so they should be, it should work. And so you start putting it inside the body, and then it causes all harmful effects on the body. So we need to see how you're using the vocabulary of one industry or one area of functioning to in another area of functioning. You should be very careful in its usage, because that can have a lot of misunderstanding, misinterpretation. And another very, very common thing is the use of words to subtly influence the sexual thinking in every. Now that has become so common mainly because of the gaming. Using of gaming has become so a simple thing. Means the words are used which is subtly indicating sexual activity. So this has percolated almost across the board. And even in when you're talking about politics, you're talking about when you use that kind of a word with a particular kind of facial expression, a sly smile or something, it immediately indicates another aspect, comparing it to that, and which adulterates our thinking. So there is no purity of thought. So that's where everything has turned topsy turvy, and we have lost our innocence because of the use of language, or rather misuse of language, or misuse of vocabulary meant for a certain thing, certain indicating to convey a certain meaning. So when you use that kind of language, you should be very, very careful, particularly when you're talking to very sensitive people. And then you wonder, where is it coming from, where what does he want to say. Then you're always on the guard to understand the intention of that person. So then there is always a constant on the guard kind of mask that you put on. Means what is it that he trying to convey. Now for example, the other day that driver was telling that his wife had made a actually he was telling in Marathi that his wife had made pork, means the mutton, or the some kind of a dish for dinner, which he said, I was fortunate that I was not there, I was on a trip. So which she was proudly telling about how delicious it was and things like that. So now then what he added was, I wouldn't touch an egg curry with a barge pole. And what about eating that dish? So he was conveying a certain kind of no, he was conveying a certain of disgust towards that kind of food, so that his body was resisting even thinking of that food, or even. So when your body is reacting like that, avoid that food. So that means it's not palatable. So just as you wouldn't eat a food that is not palatable, a rotten food, so also you wouldn't want to convey meanings that might indicate, that be indicative. It's very, very subtly indicative, but that's where you pollute everything. That's a very, of course, maybe I'm going to into the very bottom of things, but yeah, that's what it is. So when you go to the source, when you go to the roots of the thing, when you use those words, you know what it means. When I say go to the roots, immediately your mind goes to either a spiritual roots, or the roots of a plant, which actually nurtures itself by nourishes itself by extracting water from the mother earth, and then passes out through the saps into the through the osmosis effect. It comes up right up to the leaves. You get a sublime kind of a feeling or understanding of the process. But so, and when you compare it how to the a spiritual aspect, then automatically your thoughts get uplifted. So, if we use any other words that interferes with this kind of, particularly when you're dealing with this kind of a discussion, I mean, you can. It's not that you cannot avoid, particularly in ordinary communications. Most of the things on that comes as advertisements on TV is like that, which has two, three, four, five meanings to add to whatever they are trying to sell. So, if we are able to convey it at least in a one-on-one communication, or in a where there is a trust which is handed over to you, then in that trust, if you are able to convey that a purity of intention, then it will get the message across. Otherwise, very often, the what is meant to be understood gets misunderstood, distorted, and then it becomes a total fabrication. So let us not get into that kind of complication which is difficult to extract ourselves out of. It's okay to do it with a machine, but not with a human being. And which is what words convey, particularly when you're talking or when you're communicating, even virtually, not necessarily only on face to face, then even your energy passes across. But then our virtual medium has become so powerful that it is also a conveyor of divine information. And in fact, the divinity, it is the medium of the divine. So when that medium, when you're accessing that medium of the divine, you need to be extra careful, and be very religious in the use of words and choice of words. So I hope you got some food for thought. We'll continue in the next class. Thank you so much.